Okay, we are supposedly starting up, and I'm trying to votes. Oh, I'm trying to activate the bloody chat window so I can see what the hell's going on. There we go. They suddenly put an extra window up. So let's get our opening clickety-clack thing going here so that everyone will be familiar that we are seeing Evolution Hour. And Jackson will be with us shortly. Welcome to Evolution Hour 181. Replacing Darwin 43, back to Baramins and Carter pasteurized. TotukenWordPress.com is the website. You can find oodles and oodles of stuff there to play with. Whew. If I'm slightly winded, is because I'm in the process of the great sorting. I have accumulated over the years an enormous fire hazard amount of printouts of website material, some of which doesn't exist anymore, so it's archival, and printouts of technical articles and things, most of which is in my reference bibliography, but not all. And it just grew like Topsy as a series of stacks that got bigger and bigger and bigger down in my basement, to the point of where I can't get at what's behind it. Plus, I have forgotten some of the stacks of what they were because they've been down there so long. So in the course of doing the volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, which we are now knee-deep into, and also for subsequent projects, it dawned on me, my little brain woke me up one morning, and I go, aha, I know how to rearrange those stacks and in the process cull through them to yank out all the relevant material, particularly on the old flood geology creation science stack, which were like 3 piles of papers about a yard high, to cull out material that relates to the topics that we're discussing in the Big Slosh chapter, and also cosmology stuff. There's lots of material in there. Other stuff is more relating to religious apologetics, which goes into a different project. And that allows me to cull all that stuff down and get it more manageable and rearrange and put stuff in such a way that I can actually walk around my basement again and see my little dinosaur models and my playing card collection and my ocean liners and all the other little things that normally would have been visible to view, but not now. So anyway, supposedly there is a stream online. Let me put in my hi all to see if anybody is there. Say hi back. And boop, 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 boop. Whether that shows up. So far, we are waiting for an indication that that's going somewhere. And I do not see my message going anywhere. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm actually linked up to the live chat or not, because my message is not going through, and I'm not entirely sure why that is not working. Messages from audiences will display here. The question is, why am I not able to click on that? So Jackson says he's going to be here at some point. And there we go. Lisa for Truth is there, and I'm not seeing it here. Right, so at least I got that part. Yeah, yeah, I am not seeing the overlay on my window on the stream feed, but I am seeing it on the screen, so I can at least read there. Hi, Vesta and Lisa. But for some strange reason, the messages that I'm typing in here are not getting posted. So they're screwing up. There was a menu that popped up that I had to log in, and I thought I'd logged in, but apparently it's having a confusion recognizing that I'm there. So I will not be able to answer anything that you say apart from live. We'll just wing it in here, and we're still waiting for Jackson. So give the Main bit, we got our Replacing Darwin book here from Nathaniel Jensen, who is the creationist on the cutting edge of the new breed of rationalizing away young Earth creationism, because he's the one who is arguing, well, we creationists have always accepted transitional forms. Nope. Hi, Scott. At least I can see that on the window here. Give me some development on there. This particular chapter is the end of chapter 5, where, bless his little heart, he gets into baraminology and Noah's Ark and that. He just dumps that as a little teaser, which I'll get to in just a moment. I do want to thank the patrons, just in case there's a screw up on the feed. At least everyone will be thanked. Our colleagues, Hendril, Colton, Eric, Raleigh, Suris, and Zeshi. Our researcher level, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Ethan Neal, James Fitzwater, Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound. Assistant researchers, Doranku, Todas Real, Christopher Johnson. Our friends, Daniel, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Papalophagus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons, who I will continue to thank. Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Louie, Ona, Brad, Daniel, Nyanya, Staggles, Sun, Sky, Stone, Ugly German, Truls, Everett, Vincent, and Sue Weisbaum. All of you are very much appreciated in that. So, part 1, of course, is going to be about Jensen. Part 2 will be about Robert Carter and the exciting world of was Pasteur an anti-evolutionist, which will give me a chance to shamelessly plug the website where I've discussed this issue already, and we'll get you up to speed on it. Hi, Lamont. I cannot respond to anybody because the menu on my end isn't clicking. I'm not being able to put anything in, so I am not ignoring anybody that I am incapable of thinking. But at least I can see what's on screen, and that helps. Old Scratch, blah, blah, blah. Good thing I've got good eyeballs. Okay, now back to good old Nathaniel Jensen. Oh, kids, let's have the story time. Our dear pal about Noah's Ark. Noah is commanded to build an ark and to bring 2 of every land-dependent, air-breathing men on board. Not 7 of every clean one. So he just kind of skips that part. And then down below, he's decided after a bunch of footnotes, 24, 25, 26, thus applying this principle back to the text of Genesis, modern creationists conclude that Noah brought on the ark representatives of each family or order, not of each species. That's, yeah, we got that. That's what baraminology is about. Except, of course, in our case, where it has to be just our species. And then, next paragraph, he gets down 27, 28. They have no problem with the breed species argument that Darwin articulated, recognizing that it extends only up to the level of family or order when he conveniently cites himself. I'll be putting the links up on all of those, and I'll summarize them here. He's got some generic apologetic arguments, Belknap and Tim Chapey from 2015, which has this exceptionally evasive sentence. Bizarre synapsids like Esteminosuchus and Cotyorhynchus, land-dwelling animals that were neither mammals nor like living reptiles. That's because they're in the reptile-mammal transition, you evasive clods. That shows you how they just kind of avoid connecting up the dots in their own framework, and I will shamelessly plug at this point a certain, there we go, evolution slam dunk, bum, 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 bum. Which I go into all the fiddly bit details of the reptile-mammal transition and how creationists have managed to avoid it all of that time. Then he puts up Bodie Hodge and Tim Lovett's 2013 Answers book chapter on Noah's Ark, which presents their vision of the vessel, but sparse on the forensic details in documentation, an evasive graphic on ship size comparison, and mentioning that the Wyoming illustrated a wooden ship, but I would use the Wyoming, which is the old clipper ship. It was why wood ships of large size had problems, and the Ark would have even more problems. They don't build ships out of wood anymore without iron reinforcements, and certainly not hundreds of 400 feet long, for a jolly good reason, because wood doesn't have the tensile strength. It hogs and all that stuff, no matter how you work it. Woodmap, he cites Woodmap 2007 on the caring for the animals on the Ark, with a graphic that indicated that barely half of the volume of the ship would be available for animal storage, according to his model. The rest was taken up by food and water. That would radically cut down the number of species on or kinds on board. And he didn't occupy any documentation or details, and nor was his 1996 book any more detailed on that. And then, of course, he puts up Andrew Snelling's 2013 book chapter on survival of fishes. And as if that was actually resolved by Snelling. And it's a fast one in focusing on examples of species that can tolerate salty or fresh conditions. Snelling never offers any evidence that most saltwater fish can do that, or most freshwater fish can do that. So pointing to some transitional elements that can do both may explain how saltwater fish adapted in ancient times to a freshwater environment, or even how freshwater fish might adapt to a saltwater environment over time. But it wouldn't explain how, in a giant big slosh, those fish are going to survive without working out how many fish kinds there are. And Snelling doesn't do that. I'm putting a link into Erica Gutsick-Gibbons' February video on plankton, which we will be citing in the new Rocks book, which goes into the grisly details of all those little plankton swimming around in the sea, independent of the fish, are enough that if you try to cram them all into one time frame, you end up with a sludge. There's way too much biomass involved if you try to connect up the dots, which the creationists don't. And then 2016, Jensen's baraminology definition, which was the last thing he cited while he was evading on his bit. So what is going on here is Jensen sneaking in a bunch of creationist sources because he needs to at some point, but not really going into much detail on them, let alone the sources he cites don't go into much detail on them. By all means, look into them and see what's all going on here. Let's see. Yes, Lisa says, so how do the saltwater and freshwater species survive? That's a critical problem with the creationist model. The same thing goes with insects. How many insects that aren't on the Ark could theoretically survive the big slosh without dropping dead? It's a gigantic ecological conundrum that don't expect any creationists to ever figure this one out. So I'll get in the part 2 as well while we await for Jackson. Hopefully he'll be able to show up. He said he might be just a tad late from some things that came up. Robert Carter, who is in the geneticist camp there at AIG and ICR, posting in various ways in their technical literature, put up a posting last December on vaccines, repeating the myth along the way that Pasteur was an opponent of evolution. It was nice to know that Carter is not an anti-vaxxer. That's a teeny tiny little, but this Pasteur thing struck my mind because in the TIP website, I had done a discussion on this in TIP 1.7. Find that at the website that I put up right at the beginning of the thing, and I got a link to the website in the video description when I'm done on it. I do that every video. I asked him on the website, because they shut down their comments after like a couple weeks, so I had to pounce on it, documentation for it. And all he offered was Anne Lamont's 1991 Chestnut on Louis Pasteur, which I put a link in. I'll be putting that into the description as well, which didn't offer any evidence either. And I explained this in my response comment, which I sent on the 14th of December. I'd say nice try on the documentation on Pasteur's supposed opposition to evolution, Robert, but it wasn't one. The old 1991 post you put up offered absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Louis objected in any way to Darwin's descent with modification. Instead, Lamont presented the common anti-evolution party line that because Pasteur played a pivotal role in disproving biogenesis in the 1860s, that somehow could be translated into a rejection of an evolutionary model that did not, in fact, require or specify a naturalistic origin for life, only what concerned what happened to it after the origin of living things by whatever means. And I had gone in on the TIP project posting into Alan Gillen and Frank Sherwin's 2008 Louis Pasteur's Views on Creation, Evolution, and the Genesis of Germs, which comes from their Answers Research Journal. And that represented a much longer and more detailed statement of that Pasteur defense. So it's interesting that Carter didn't think to reference it. But it didn't matter because they really were a terrible discussion anyway, even down to not understanding what people's names were. So there was a little hilarious bit where they referred to a 19th century physiologist, Marie-Jean Pierre Flourens, 1794 to 1867, but referring to him as Mrs. Flourens. Apparently they thought Marie-Jean was a woman's name and therefore was a woman doctor, but terribly sorry. And I go into the details of all of that in the tip posting. The closest we can get to Pasteur offering any opinion at all on evolution is a brief passage in his 1864 address to the Sorbonne, in which he mentioned, quote, "Great problems are in question today, keeping every thinking man in suspense, the unity or multiplicity of human races, the creation of man 1,000 years or 1,000 centuries ago, the fixity of species, or the slow and progressive transformation of one species into another." No criticism, just that one mention. But Pasteur did explicitly warn believers of his time not to pin their God defense on the biogenesis issue. So if Pasteur held any disagreements, Old Scratch it says, how did the plants grow in the salted earth? Is that the salt coming in from saltwater oceans gradually uh, uh, disappearing after the flood? There's a whole bunch of biological issues that was going on. Where was the olive tree that the olive branch comes from that the dove picks up? All the plants were obliterated on the planet. Where exactly were they? And speaking of seeds, where the hell are the maize and the rice coming into the picture? Because we know that nobody in the Mesopotamian Bible Belt had access to any of those things, and yet they would have had to have been on the ark. And the creationists avoid thinking about how did that work, and why did the people who eventually wander at high speed into the Americas, developing genetic haplotypes completely disconnected from anybody about the Asian populations, manage to carry not only corn, but tomatoes and all those potatoes and their flock of llamas and all the capybaras and all the other critters that are endemic to the New World that must have been on Ark because everything else was destroyed. It's a gigantic mess of an argument, and it's never going to get anywhere on that. Anyway, back to Pasteur. Good old Louis, if he harbored any criticisms of evolution, he apparently didn't get very public about it. And apparently, nobody ever caught wind of it at the time. And how do we know this? As I point out in my tip posting, it's like the old Sherlock Holmes tale where the dog does not, curious incident of the dog not barking in the night. And the issue is none of the Darwinists criticized Pasteur. The pit bull, Alfred Wallace and Thomas Huxley, all were really keen to pounce on anybody that was criticizing evolutionary theory at the time while they were alive. And so you would have thought that if Pasteur was going wink, wink, nudge, nudge, this evolution is a crock, somebody would have heard about it and it would have gotten back to these other people. But that's because there's no indication that he was an anti-evolutionist. What he did in that paragraph that I'm just quoting is fence straddling. That he's just saying there are all these things people are talking about, like humans 1,000 years ago or 1,000 centuries ago, which is 100,000 years. He's basically saying, don't bother about that. These are all issues that have not been settled, not been discussed, and I'm not going to discuss them. I'm going back to my test tubes. Thank you very much. That was his cathedral that he worshipped in. He was a nominal Catholic, but he doesn't seem to have been ridiculously devout about it. He worshipped his work. That was his religion, in the same way it was for Charles Darwin. And Darwin apparently held Pasteur in very high esteem all during his life. So it's just a non-argument to contend that Pasteur was clearly an opponent of evolution when nobody can document him actually opposing evolution. But who would say Robert Carter has sloppy scholarship? I just did. There we go. Now I'm trying to read the sentences down there. The freshwater fish for 52 years, 2 years. Perhaps the miraculous only remaining. Yeah, if the creationists, of course, are indulging in misplaced concreteness here, which is it could be a miracle. Why are you trying to make it sound plausible when you could just have God magically make the fish survive? Doesn't God have the power to do that? And that's would simplify it, but at the moment they do that kind of an argument, they've suddenly disconnected from any pattern of being scientific. They're basically going miracle. The whole point of creation science is that the science, the geology, the genetics, all of the physical evidence, behold, it shows the truth of the creator. And so they can't indulge in that miraculous context, even though they have to press really close to it, as has been pointed out to me on many occasions. The appeal to altering the constituents of subatomic physics to make them fit why we have the radionucleotides that we do and in the balance that we do is perilously close to just miraculous. And the idea of creating adult organisms on the creation day, that's another one that kind of lurks around there. For those creationists that still bothered too much about what was going on, they're so busy thinking about the flood, they forget the creation day part. Yes, how do the plants grow in salted earth? As well as just excessively damp earth. As anybody that runs farms know, unless you are acclimated to it, in the way that the Egyptians were with their floods that would come and bring silt in, and then they would conveniently retire after a certain amount of time. The water recedes and it leaves all this basically fertilized earth on their fields, and they can go and do their planting and get all that out of the way, and it occurs by clockwork and regularly in a time that isn't interfering with their operation. It's quite a different kettle of fish when you have flooding going on catastrophically. As happened with the Yangtze River in ancient China, where it breached their irrigation ditches. That is what shows up in their flood story. And in the case of the Babylonians and Mesopotamian flood myths, it washes the cities away. It's all built out of sun-dried brick. I mean, stuff is not resilient to floods. The Egyptians had the advantage of bloody stonework, so they could let the water come in and their stone buildings are still there afterwards. That's they built to last, and they had the advantage of all that bloody limestone and stuff. They could haul in granite and stuff from other locations, bring them in during the flood when the water was high, and just let the boat sit there until the waters recede and it drops right down, and boop, they just offload. I'm sure they had this all worked out. We can see pictures of them heave-hoeing colossal obelisks and statuaries on sledges, people pouring oil down on the bottom to lubricate it and all that kind of stuff. And if you've got enough people, and ironically, they weren't necessarily slave labor. There's indications that when the Nile was in flood, nobody could do anything. So people might as well go and be busy themselves doing shit like building temples to the god kings and makes themselves useful during that period until they can get back to their farms. Yes, it's kind of weird that it would take so much more, make so much more sense that God would just throw lightning on the bad fruits than all this flood thing. That's in fact, it's even beyond that. Part of the things that's a dead giveaway that the Bible story is very human as a document is that God does stuff that people knew happened naturally. They knew about fire, and they knew about rains and torrential floods, and they knew once in a while a meteor might come down, so fire from heaven. brimstone and stuff from volcanic deposits. The whole Dead Sea region is tectonically active, so they would have known about that. Rumblings in the earth. There's a whole bunch of stuff they know. But there are things that don't happen naturally. For example, heavy anvils don't suddenly float in the air, and people don't float in the air, and let alone fly around like without wings. And objects don't suddenly implode or expand in size or disappear poof in a magical thing. That doesn't happen in the natural world, and so they don't give God those powers. God could just easily uncreate stuff if he doesn't like the nasty human beings that are doing all sorts of bad shit. And if you try to read the Genesis account, it doesn't say what exactly they were doing that was so bad. It's not merely vague, it's completely uninformative. But at any rate, something bad was going on. It reminds me of the old show, A Cold Comfort Farm. It was done with, I think, Patrick Stewart was in it very early in his career. This was like maybe the 1970s, and it was just a ruthlessly funny novel that was written in the 1920s, satirizing the kind of bucolic fiction that was very popular in the 1920s. And this one battle axe old lady, the plot of it is that this modern flapper type goes to visit her relatives out in the hinterlands in the countryside, and she tidies everything up and brings them all into the 20th century. And it's just a riotous social satire. But anyway, the one line that's in the TV version, it's not in the film version that was made maybe in the early 2000s. And it was an adequate one, but not nearly as vitriolically clever as the TV one back BBC did years ago. Anyway, there's this little old battle axe of a lady in there saying, "When I was a little girl, no bigger than a titty wren, I saw something nasty in the woodshed." And she keeps repeating that all through the story as a leitmotif. And in the TV version of it, at one point, the flapper girl, after she's tidied everybody up, asks her what she saw, and all we hear is her whispering. And the girl says, "Did the goat die?" And that, I think, was the end of the show. So there's a bit of a piece. But the point is that if there was all these iniquitous human beings in the flood times, and only Noah and his children are righteous and shall be saved, couldn't he just uncreate them? Zot, poof, done. Not have to kill a tree. Don't have to get rid of the dinosaurs. Don't have to get rid of the therapsids. Any of the critters that are floating or walking around there, the plesiosaurs out in the ocean, frittering along with the whales and all the rest. Doesn't have to do that at all. Doesn't have to do cataclysms. Doesn't have to do ice ages. Doesn't have to turn coal seams, floating forests into coal seams or anything else. And if you wanted a coal seam for the human beings, he could create it directly. He's God. So there's a misplaced concreteness about the story. It makes perfect sense as something that was adapted from the Bible epics, from the Babylonian Enuma Elish and all these other things, but it's incredibly implausible otherwise. Let's see if I can squeak in close enough to read some of the other comments. Yeah, too vague, too blurry. I can't quite see it. Something about problems in looks like black something or other are brackish water fish that can tolerate fresh water. Yeah, there certainly would be, and Snelling makes a point of mentioning them, a handful of species that have substantial salt tolerance. By the way, there's evidence that's adduced by the bone structure and isotope balances and all that of like Tiktaalik and these early tetrapods, which we were discussing in volume 2 of the Rocks were there. Chilling before Jackson can come. Jackson can't show up today. That's the way it goes. That Tiktaalik and these early tetrapods had a broad range of salt tolerance. And the people who try to figure out what's going on with the fish that are expanding in, they've already got little legs and stuff, and the tetrapodal format predates going up on the land. It's the habitat change that, especially if you're equipped with lungs as well as gills, or the proto lungs, which is, there's a whole literature on that little side as well. um, that if you live in an environment with increasing aridity, where your little pond dries up, if you can walk to another pond, um, that's handy. So there would have been a selection pressure on that. And originally, the tetrapods had like 7 or 8 fingers. But when they start going into landforms, that's a little too much, too many fingers. And so selection pressure trims it down to a pentadactyl mode, which apparently is really versatile. And that's basically what everyone's stuck with. And then there's some reductions from that point on. Dinosaurs lose digits all the time. Mammals are relatively boring, in other than horses that have lost some of their side toes and all of that. And so that the modern horse hoof is just one of the toes. That's fairly unusual for mammals. Mammals are relatively boring when it comes to that. They don't change the number of vertebrae. There's a whole bunch of dynamics because they're quadrupedal, that there are constraints, and I think we alluded to that in the rocks were there. There are constraints upon the ability of the vertebral number to change easily, because it alters the balancing of all of those viscera and the lungs and all this other stuff. And so the stress loads, and there's a whole bunch of factors that make that not very helpful. Whereas dinosaurs, bipedal in particular, or for that matter, the layouts of the giant sauropods, they alter their number of neck vertebrae a lot. There's a surprisingly large amount of variety in there. And that is therefore suggesting something about their genetics. Paleogenomics eventually, if memory serves me, alanine repeats, which is one acid. In the HOX13 gene is what produces the number of digits. So you have 5 alanines, you get 5 digits. You get 6 alanines, you get a 6th digit. You get 4 alanines, you only got 4 digits. And that's the way it goes. And presumably there would be comparable mechanisms operating in the structures of dinosaurs, of which, in principle, some of that can be inferred by looking at their descendants, the birds, even though those are highly derived forms that have eliminated tails and a whole bunch of things. So you're probably only going to be finding the vestigial genetic fossils of a lot of these little bits because they're a derived form of theropod. Yes, I don't see any other questions or comments on there. It's very annoying not being able to see the discussion directly. I chalk it up to restream, screwing all that matter up, but at least I can see it on the live part of the screen. We're about halfway through the show. Jackson has not appeared, obviously. So he may or may not make it. I may have been delayed also. We will nonetheless say how much fun we've been having. We had a little chat yesterday about the preparation that he's doing for a debate on the creationism issue and the Cambrian explosion with the Muslim anti-evolutionists. I've forgotten his name, Ahmed, although he operates under a pseudonym on YouTube. Dapper Dino and others have had interactions with him. And it looks like he is a vacuous secondary trawler of presumably intelligent design light literature. And that's about as far as it goes. He doesn't name drop particular scientists and all that. And that's a dead giveaway that he's miles away from even the apologetic data field. But we'll find out more when the debate comes. Anyway, why he would have agreed to have a discussion on the Cambrian, which would be the worst thing to do. He may think it's the best thing because the intelligent design literature puts so much out fuming about the Cambrian explosion. The problem is they leave out an awful lot too, and you're going to find out just how much Jackson is putting in on the matter. One of these days, as time goes on, way down the road, we may end up doing like a book on the Cambrian explosion and some of these other things, because there's certainly a colossal amount of information. The whole shift in time from the Ediacara biota into the Cambrian, it's a fascinating subject area that is getting more and more fascinating every year, because they continue to find more fossil data, which is not easy given the fact that the critters are soft-bodied and you have to rely on Lagerstätten. But there's enough ocean chemistry dynamics that favor fairly good preservation of a lot of these little soft-bodied critters that they've been able to make an enormous amount of progress on it. And the other end, of course, would be paleogenomics. Um, I'm sure there are geneticists who are just scratching their heads trying to figure out, how do you get the Ediacara frond organisms from a homeobox mix? And can you replicate some of that stuff genetically? Figure out what's going on. How much of that will be resolved within my lifetime or Jackson's lifetime, we'll find out. But in principle, it's something that either the Ediacara biota had no connection to the stem group metazoans and therefore aren't running off of homeobox genes, or originated after the homeobox genes or before the homeobox genes developed and went in a completely different direction. At the moment, paleogenomics has not been able to work out what the proto-HOX system would have been like. They're kind of stuck at characterizing the HOX genes and their little cousins, the para-HOX genes. But we'll see. The paleogenomics field just keeps going forward, and I can't imagine it will stop. So the one unanswered question from my aspect is, did the Ediacara? Oh, I think Jackson is here. I see a little blurb coming up here. Hey, let's bring you on the screen. Speak, Jackson.
Ahoy.
Ahoy, ahoy, matey. Yes, we'll cover the. I filled in all the blurbs on good old Jensen. Bless his heart, was rhapsodizing about Noah's Ark and the Baramins, and cited a whole slew of evasive papers by himself and others, including the Hodge chapter from the Answers book and Snelling's chapter on fish surviving and all that. Yes. And
I believe we covered all that.
Some of it, although the fish were going to be, I've been culling out the material on some of the stuff that will be potentially add-ons for rocks too, to make sure we deal with it. And this is another generic question that I want everybody to know, and either you or I can be contacted on it. Because if there are particular topics for everybody reading the first book where you go, well, you didn't mention so-and-so, let us know. And we can check on, because its odds are that if especially if it's something where you'd really love us to have that put in, we can deal with it, because there is an awful lot of stuff that we didn't cover because it was going to be one book that got so big that we had to split it into 2 volumes. And I'm going gangbusters. I was telling Jackson earlier when we had a little chit chat yesterday that I've been going into culling mode and resorting my masses of material, and it has been laborious, but whoa, there's stuff in there that I'd forgotten that I had in some gobsmacking stupid shit from various miscellaneous creationists that I'd forgotten about because they were in the notations of hard copy, whose title would not suggest that this was about stupid shit. You know, it'd just be reasons why evolution is wrong, and then you find out, oh, that's what you think. So one of the ones, oh, and by the way, I can't see the live chat part in my main window. I haven't been able to answer anybody, so they glitched up on the setup in here. But I do have the restream thing running in the window that everybody theoretically can see on the video, and to the extent that I can read tiny print in a blur, I'm able to catch little bits of it every time. So if you can see that as well, and you see better than I am, you can jump in and make some comments, but I can't highlight them or do anything because they're not showing up in the main chat. So something's weird. It's amazing that it knows it's there because it's repeating it on screen, but it isn't putting it on my window to where I can actually respond to it. Go figure.
Well, the fact that the internet works at all, RJ.
Yeah, and I was giving a plug for your upcoming Cambrian debate with Ahmed the Vacuous.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah,
it's going to be a hoot.
I was suggesting that someday it might even be a delightful thing to do a book on that whole origin of metazoans, Ediacara, Cambrian period. Yeah, that can be after a few other projects down the line. But I've kept pre-sorting so much material, because like I have a whole stack of stuff about yay high, all on the genetic systems that predate Cambrian, that are basal Metazoan genetic systems and all of that. And so there's a ton of material on that, and it'll only get more rich as the dust settles on the discussions that you're presenting. We'll be alluding to it kind of on the sly in rocks too in there, but that's something to keep afresh for future work, because science is just so neat and it just keeps expanding. And the creation is so far behind.
Yeah, not even aware that there's a curve.
Yeah, and it makes it amusing for us. One of the ones that we mentioned the infamous missing day matter in book one. What we didn't discuss was another great canard of creationism, which is the lunar dust myth. And that one is going to be mentioned in the Lyle chapter on cosmology. And I've been culling out the ones because there are quite a few examples. And as recently as 2005, a high school teacher, I can't remember what state it was in, but I got the information on it, had a bit where he gave extra credit to anybody that read his creation book that he had available. And one whistleblower downloaded the whole bloody thing. It's like 600 pages long. It's just ludicrous. But it's a mass of big print. Just imagine raw mat on steroids kind of stuff. But in that was the lunar dust myth.
Of course.
Yeah. And so anyway,
600 pages.
Yeah, which of that large print, all culled superficially from Scott Hughes, Dwayne Gish, a bunch of creationist works that were themselves very ancient. But the lunar dust myth is a particularly interesting one because it's not merely wrong, it's not even wrong. It's colossally inaccurate. It's stupidly wrong. So stupid that the creationists at ICR and AIG have pointed out that it's really a bad argument. And yet, so many creationists still trot it out. Why? Because they read it in the old book and they have never checked up to see whether anything has happened since 1985.
Well, yeah. I mean, AIG has no articles, if I remember correctly, on the Paluxy tracks. But CMI, interestingly, has an article that says specifically, don't use this argument.
Don't use it. Yeah, and the Paluxy tracks, another one, of course, that is a litmus test item is Piltdown, Nebraska Man, which we will be alluding to in the Human Evolution chapter. And that one, hardly a month goes by that one or the other of us don't bump into somebody on social media who tries to wave Piltdown, and then I'm waiting for Nebraska Man to show up because they almost always joined at the hip in their apologetics.
I mean, it's like, good Lord, give it a rest.
100 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Boy.
I mean, and I think maybe the best tactic is, all right, you think these are frauds? Let's go through the list of all the creationist frauds, the Combro figures, and the Ica
which
stones.
We will be discussing in Volume 2. Oh yeah, all of that. The amazing pile of stuff.
Or the picture of the alleged like Aborigine plesiosaur picture,
which Standing for Truth tried to shove down my throat.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my God, guys, you dwarf us in how many frauds you have on your side,
and how
they weren't even frauds.
Another one is the supposed plesiosaur that was hauled up by a Japanese fishing boat back in the 1970s or so. It was a basking shark. There was technical papers. There's been work on done all of that. I mean, it's just been settled. And to their credit, some of the more scrupulous creationists do put up little warning flags saying, "Don't use this shit." But it doesn't stop the idiots because too many of them are relying on really old material on that. And the thing that gets annoying, and Erica has steam coming out her ears when she deals with the same sort of thing, is that the conclusion jump once, well, because Piltdown Man was a fraud, look at that fraud Lucy, and look at Australopithecus sediba, and all of those are all frauds. They're just made up.
Yeah, and it's like you then have to have a conversation with them about the history of the find itself, because
Yeah.
neither Archaeopteryx. I was thinking of the Archaeopteryx fraud,
Yeah.
the Archaeopteryx fraud thing, but neither Piltdown Man nor Nebraska Man were frauds in that they were evolutionists or anthropologists, whatever, faking the fossils to fool the public into believing evolution.
Well,
Neither one.
that was so really for Piltdown in the sense that the guy that did the hoax, who had done other weird things, I think that but I have most of the
But it
material.
wasn't to believe evolution.
Well,
He
it
was
was
trying to
for
like
his own
fool the
fame.
anthropologist, wasn't
And
he?
remember, I think he died
Yeah.
in like 1913 or 14, and so he was out of the picture. World War One came along, which meant that the bones were locked away in the British Museum. Only
Right.
casts were
Yeah.
available, and the thing is that even by the 1920s and 30s, there were a variety of paleontologists who were
Yes.
looking at these askance and going, this doesn't really fit in with what we're finding everywhere else. And so that there was a great deal of skepticism.
Yeah.
It was still being trotted out in a lot of general books and so forth and so on, but it was increasingly awkward. And so
Yes.
many of the material from the early 20th century, I think Dubois finds of the Peking man or Java man,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that stuff was lost during World War II. One of the museums was blown to smithereens by the Japanese in a
Right.
bombing raid, and so a lot of the material wasn't available. But immediately, practically the dust had settled on World War II, and you had a whole bunch of people going, we want to test those Piltdown bones. And so they brought them out of the vaults, and
Yeah.
very quickly, we got problems. And
Well, yeah.
so that was
I
dismissed.
think there's a report. Yeah, I think there's a report from the early 20s from like a French anthropologist who said this seems like an ape, a jaw that has been
Yeah.
worn down or something
Yeah,
like
and
that.
remember,
It's
the originals weren't being looked at. They were just looking at the casts. And the
you're right.
technology
Yeah.
for doing casts and all that was way less sophisticated in those days. So you had 2 world wars, you had a depression, you had a whole bunch of stuff
Mhm.
that kind of occupied people's minds that was going on there.
Yep.
But the thing is that meanwhile,
The Great Emu War.
Robert Broom and others were finding those Australopithecines down in Africa, where Darwin suspected things came from. A little primer on stuff, which we'll be alluding to in more detail in the book. But you have to remember there was like human evolution origin wars, to where your French and Germans have your Neanderthals, and then your Asians have all of these Peking man and Java man. Where's our proper British human ancestors? We need a British person
Right.
for that. And that's what the motivation for why Piltdown was hoaxed in large measure. And then worse, we're finding all of these ones from Africa. Does that mean that we're related to those people? And Darwin didn't have a
Right.
problem with that idea, but boy, there were a lot of people in the mid 20th century that didn't want. They could barely get
I
by
mean,
with Asians. Haeckel was a big Asian origin person.
RJ, I think saying Darwin was fine with it, but a lot of British people weren't, kind of summarizes evolution in
Yes,
the early 1800s.
well, the Queen Victoria, which may be apocryphal, but supposedly
Right.
when she was
Yeah.
told about evolution, she says, well, I hope it isn't true. But if it is true, I hope it does not become widely known. Something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It does sound rather like the Queen, which is sort of how the royal family is still dealing with Meghan Markle, I mean, this hasn't changed any.
Yikes.
Yeah, well, some things don't really change.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And the wonderful part is that the forensic, a thing that everybody needs to remember on human evolution is the main benchmarks have not changed within my lifetime. That we know that the basal groups are Australopithecines in Africa. Which exact species is unclear. And are we sure we found all of them? Because there's much more dynamic going on. We know species can coexist in niche partitioning and all of that. And then finally, you start seeing this Homo erectus bunch with a bunch of cousins and things knocking around that spreads all over the place. Oh, you have your finger up, sir.
Can I answer a question? You got a question from the audience.
Oh, jump in, yeah, because you can see it better than I can.
Vandalia asked about ERVs in plants. I found a paper. I'm trying to figure out what year it is. I cannot seem to tell what year it is. Okay, well, this paper, it says 2002. Okay, so 2002 paper on ERV, on one group of ERVs in plants. Oh my goodness.
Well, what's
And
the
it's
lead
titled
author's name?
David A. Wright and Daniel F. Voitas.
W-R-I?
W-R-I, yep. And it says ATH, I guess that's Attila 4 of Arabidopsis and Calypso of soybean define a lineage of endogenous plant retroviruses. So Vandalia, just look up plant endogenous retrovirus, and this was the first paper that pops up.
Ooh, send me a link to that because I don't have that in my bibliography. I have a bunch of other David Wright stuff, Bayesian estimation of fossil phylogenies and crinoids, and he's got a broad range of stuff. Non-photocytic bacteria. That's David T. There's more than one David Wright. There's 3 of them.
This is David A. Wright.
Yeah. Ooh, in fact, I better.
There you go. I sent it to you.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason why it's relevant is I've been recognizing that there's a point where we can put in some material on the carnivorous plant and creationists' arguments on that. Lunig, the guy with the umlaut on his name, that gets siphoned off by creationists and intelligent designers. And so I realized that a lot of that plant evolution material and plant origins, it's relating, first of all, to the ecosystems that are occurring in the long spread of time reflected by the Grand Canyon, and also relates to the dynamics of phylogenies and the genetics of stuff. So I think it'll be a relevant one to include somewhere in the road on that. And I have a large stack of stuff that can be deployed in various locations in the book to make sure that we cover a lot of this stuff, because it's really neat. And all the material I'm cross-checking to make sure that this is stuff that wasn't discussed in the first book, or if it was alluding to a matter but this expands on it, we can allude to what we mentioned in the first book. So there's a lot of it because we, as much work as we had done up to the point when we finished the first book, both of us, I think, recognize, wow, we're just scratching the surface on some of these topics. There's so much out there, and those poor creationists just have no idea how much stuff is out there. And the more we can link up, the more useful it is, because it provides a data field. Endogenous retroviruses are so relevant because it's that business end of how much of the variety of life has come about from things from one kingdom inserting into another bunch and producing new novelties that way and shaking stuff up on there. When, as we know, of course, everything that's happened within a kind is degeneration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, those damn little Baramins. So all the stuff that's popping up, the cosmology era is probably one of the fields that I'll be diving into most fresh, because it was one of those that I just tiptoed into in my old tip work. I had some stuff on it, which in some respects I'm kind of glad I didn't, because the field has expanded so radically since Hubble that you've got a whole different network of information. Like, we don't have to argue, are there like stars that have planets around them? Yeah, maybe. We can see them.
Maybe, just maybe.
Yeah. And so things have moved along into a whole new field in that respect. The cosmology, all the anti-big bangers are as bad as the flat earthers at this point, because boy, they ain't getting any traction in the cosmological field, even though the Answers in Genesis and ICR just keep putting out posts almost daily, fuming about how Big Bang refuted, Big Bang contradicted, Big Bang is on the ropes. Big Bang. No, sorry.
Well, I mean, that's kind of true of anything with Answers in Genesis.
Yeah,
you know. So
and frankly, the intelligent designers, they go hyperbolic too. It's always this is the death knell. This finding from Science Paper X, and for death knell for evolution, that's going to do him in this time. But for those who can remember, the advantage of being an old fart, back when you were a very tiny child, back in the 1990s, that the intelligent design
Baby
movement
Jackson
was completely convinced that, boy, Darwinism was on the ropes, because like Martin Luther telling the Jews about the Reformation, that they're all going to become Christians. The Philip Johnson bunch were convinced that all they needed to do was present all of these problems they've uncovered with Darwinism, and that's just going to be it. Those scientists are just going to throw it all off. And they were figuring about a 10-year plan to take over the sciences. And that was in 1999.
Needless to say.
So they were anticipating they would be the dominant paradigm by now.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is, I think they still kind of all act like that. The creationist and intelligent design people still act like, well, it's in a sense, it's sort of like the end times people, because they're like, all right, any day now,
we're often
any
the
day
same
now,
people.
any day now. Yep. The whole community is just gonna collapse, and we're gonna take over and show them everything's wrong.
Or the Donald Trump was going to be inaugurated on March 4th bunch.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly the same thing, which relates to whole concept of why do people have conspiracy thinking? How can they deflect obviously counterfactual bits? When you have messianic groups that believe in cultic beliefs, what happens in their heads? What happens sociodynamically when it don't happen? And it turns out that there's rationalization modes, but they don't really change the way they think. They stop thinking the old stupid thing and move on to be a new stupid
It's
thing.
a new conspiracy theory for why this didn't happen. Yeah.
Don't forget, the Millerites, when the world didn't end in the 1840s, repeatedly, turned into the Seventh-day Adventists that created the Young Earth creationism movement, that created Ben Carson.
It's a long line of stupid going on there.
Yes. There's the metastasizing little pathway, the lineage of it. And so I've been functionally doing the systematics of anti-evolutionism. Who relies on who? Because practically nobody invents their anti-evolutionism out of thin air. They rely upon somebody else who did the stupid for them, and they like the stupid. It sounds good to them. And they repeat the stupid and embellish it. And Coulter would be an example of somebody like that. She just soaks up Bill Dembski like a sponge, and then she puts in her little 2 cents worth along the way, but not realizing what the original material is. A lot of the material that I had in those stacks that I'm culling through are the thing that I describe as the smorgasborders, which are the ones that cherry pick stuff. Ooh, I found the website that said something I like. I will take it and not notice that it's Harun Yahya or a Dwayne Dish post or an intelligent design stuff from Casey Luskin. I don't care that their views are completely mutually incompatible philosophically. I'm going to just take this little snippet because it said what I wanted to be true. And you find that really frequently in these real lower echelon ones, the ones that make raw math sound sophisticated.
Wow, RJ, we are setting the low in the dirt.
Low bar.
We're setting the bar in the dirt. You know,
we're subterranean there. You didn't think stupid could get into negative numbers, did you?
You went into the basement and then set it on the floor. That's how low that
we're in
is.
the sub basement. We're discovering there's a whole bunch and if you dig the hole deep enough and put a microphone down, you can hear hell.
I think that is an apt description of listening to their videos. Yeah.
But there was a trope that was passing around, and I think I've got the notes for it stuck in the base to put up in a future thing, of ones that were arguing that there actually was in Russia a mining group that burrowed down into the earth and pierced through the top of hell, and they could hear the screams of the people down there on the microphone. This was making the rounds in the turn of the century.
I feel like Satan would have his place a little bit more tidy. Like there wouldn't be just a bunch of people screaming. He'd be like, shh.
It is well known that acoustic shielding is well employed in hell.
Exactly. Yeah.
Noise canceling headphones. That's satanic.
Yeah. Hey, that's what That's what these are. I like when the other people in this house are yelling Jackson, then they open the door and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't
With
hear you.
me, it's if my brain gets focused on a particular subject matter, I can become so engrossed in it that you could have a stampede of gazelle through my living room.
I mean, I got these because they're like sound canceling. When I tried them on at the store, and like they're playing music, and then I put it on, and it's like it sounds like it's way far away.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like,
Which, given
"Ooh,
what music, you should put that in air quotes, music that they play in the
oh,
thing. It's not necessarily the stuff that you are really going to be enlightened.
oh my goodness, RJ."
Oh, I'm a scamp. Elevator music and all of that kind of stuff there. Music that is deliberately designed to be basically acoustic wallpaper and inoffensive to anybody with a functioning brainstem, which means that anyone with a functioning brainstem is going to be bored silly by it.
I don't know what kind of music you're listening to.
Oh, now another topic, probably not for this book, subsequent work, has to
Okay,
do with the nature of music and why we as a species do that. It's actually enough of a digression that relates to the whole issue about consciousness and the original language, and there's a bunch of connected stuff to that. But I can imagine there's a big part of that. Aesthetic issues about what is good and bad
yeah,
relate to this, and whether there is any objective good or bad stuff within the arts and all of that, and
sure,
how do we perceive that cognitively.
right,
That's stuff that I've got a whole little subsection that I've been ferreting on, because it turns out there is some neurological connections between language processing and musical appreciation.
sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah. And it's, even though it seems to be such a completely different modality, other than the fact that it's acoustic, but you'd think, grammatical language and a pentatonic scale, you go, what the hell does that have to do with each other? But yeah, there we go. And that's
Yeah,
kind of interesting. Yeah,
I can
we're
see
past
that.
the hour, and we can fill you in with any important blurbs that you want to fill in our audience about what's going on in the world of Jackson.
Dapper and I are working on something.
Ooh, a something.
Yeah, it should
Dapper's,
be out in the near future.
yeah. There's a whole slew of material that keeps coming on. I keep on accumulating lists of videos to watch. I put the timings down and go, okay, that's a 2-hour one. That's going to take some time to go through. And so there's a never-ending battle of incoming information going on. But as I
Yeah.
clear away my stacks of paper and sort material out, I'll be sorting material out as well in due course for stuff relating to systematics and biogeography. There's a huge blob of material on that one, and a lot of the material is accessible that you can get on a word search through the bibliography. But the stuff that's the trickiest and the easiest to misplace are the ones where the title of the paper isn't necessarily telling you the information. Unless you
Right.
have hard copy with annotations, you can just overlook it. And given the amount of material that we have at the disposal, I'm amazed that we don't overlook more.
Neurons are like supercomputers. Auntangelo 2021. Yes,
Oh,
because
and and
supercomputers
if
will put.
so, if so, Otangelo is a Commodore 64 computer.
I mean, because computers famously take RNA and other
Oh,
and
don't you know that
neurotransmitters and
if you put
shuffle them.
your remote control next to your computer, it's going to endosymbiotically switch over all those channel settings into your computer, and pretty soon your computer is watching Netflix and you don't even know about it.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
That would be what would happen if computers were like living organisms.
Yeah, which you know.
That actually whole brings up the whole faulty analogy, standing for truth in his bloody automobiles and all-terrain vehicles and all of that
Well,
stuff that he's
I mean
been going on about.
that's Hovind, or you took that from Hovind. So
yeah, and the point is, I would love to see any of them do a cladistic analysis of it. That try to do a cladistic analysis and generate nested hierarchies from them. I dare you. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually that's a point. Yeah. Which car did fire trucks evolve from?
Yeah.
Which one gave birth to the fire truck?
Yeah, and there's a point precisely because they're designed objects, they don't fall into nested hierarchies, and you can find abrupt changes that are going on, what we would call saltational, if it were in a living organism, to where there's no dynamic going on. That happened in 1964 when Elwood Engel, who designed the 61 Lincoln and a bunch of automobiles there, he was in the Lincoln division there at Ford. After the uber success of the 61 Lincoln, the box on wheels, everybody has seen it, instantly recognized it. Won awards at the time. It was just gobsmackingly clean and lean and modern. So Chrysler, where Virgil Exner had just retired, hired him on to be their replacement. And he started redesigning Chrysler products in the Ford image. So the 64 Imperial looked suspiciously like what he designed for the 1961 Thunderbird that lost in the Thunderbird competition, and that got turned into the 61 Lincoln because Robert McNamara was going to cancel the Lincoln division because it had never had any money at all, it never earned a dime, and they were in a economic recession, and car sales were down and all that, and he was within a gnat's eyelash of obliterating the Lincoln division. They were having trouble with their Edsel product at the same time, and so they were having financial arrears. And all of that happened. Well, suddenly you have a saltational change in design characteristics. They're still made from Chrysler parts, but the shell of it is now dealing with a completely different design aesthetic. And those kind of abrupt things aren't what we're seeing in natural phylogenes. So I'd love to see them go through the reptile-mammal transition, or the dinosaurs, or brachiopods, or anything else in the history of life, and look at the details, point by point by point by point by point, and try to detect these abrupt saltational changes. The most they can do is, let's go back to a point where the fossil record peters out, and they're all soft-bodied, so we don't have any record of them. Then, wow, we can see discontinuities, but you don't see the abrupt things, like the blind facultid trilobites. What, God suddenly take a disliking to the facultids, curse them to be blind, and the schizochroial eyes that are only in one lineage. They're not like intermittent windshield wipers that show up on all the cars because everybody's copying everybody. Copyright patent be damned, which is what actually happened. No, you have them restricted to a particular lineage. No matter how good those little eyeballs are, none of the other trilobites can get access to it. Why? Because they're an evolving lineage. There's no designer to say, well, that's a good idea. I spent billions of years not thinking this up, but I suddenly figured out how to do schizochroial eyes. Oh, maybe I should share them with the other trilobites that I'm also responsible for. That's what would happen in a design system.
I like the idea. I spent billions of years not thinking about
this. Well, do you realize that God spent forever not thinking about becoming Jesus?
Yeah, I guess that's, yeah.
And so I'd like to know, in an eternal organism, an entity, when exactly in the eternity did the changeless organism decide to change its mind and create a universe? Good question.
Yeah, yeah. I hung out with the philosophy club at LSU Baton Rouge one time, and they started talking about stuff like that. And I was like,
It comes across to me because I'm familiar with infinite sets, and the pitfalls that you can get into in the moment when you start trying to winnow your way through infinites. And I have spent, as a little cottage hobby of mine, when I bump into smug engineers, which I have bumped into in many iterations from the jobs I've been in, where they'll start talking and they'll name drop infinity as though it's a single thing. And I will cause their brains to explode when I will casually say, oh, you realize some infinities are bigger than others. And they will go, well, no, And then I will start going off on Cantor and transfinite mathematics and Aleph null and Aleph one, and eventually they wish they never had been born.
Oh my goodness.
And I've been able to do it so because they just really, their brains are ones that are used to bean counting things, and they think of just infinity as, well, it's like infinite, and it's exactly the same vagueness. Well, when somebody said, "Do you believe in God?" and it said, "Well, which God did you have in mind?" and they said, "Well, God,"
Right.
and that it's a placeholder that they think they have an understanding of, when in fact, no, it's just a placeholder. And it turns out there are different size infinities and different forms of them. And when you think about infinity, there's a big debate that mathematicians and physicists and stuff get into irrelevantly. Are there any infinities in nature? No, obviously the universe apparently is a finite size. And if so, it has a finite number of particles. So even if you count just neutrons, neutrinos, and hadron, all the little particles, it's still a finite number. It's a big finite number, but it's still a finite number. So, but then you get into another issue of whether space is particulate or not. Because if space is particulate, then there would be a finite number of particles of space, right? So therefore, there's only a finite number of particles of space particles in the universe, like a jiffy, maybe the time it takes 10 to the minus 54 seconds, whatever the time and space, Planck time. Time takes across the nucleus of a hydrogen atom. That's the tiniest thing they think of in physics. But what if space is a continuum? That there's no particles of space, it's a continuous thing. Well, now you have a different thing, because there are an infinite number of things in a continuous lineage. Just like in the number of numbers, there's an infinite number of numbers between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Not merely an infinite number of numbers between 1 and 2. There are an uncountable infinity of numbers between 1 and 2. Because now you throw in all the irrational numbers. And the moment you bring that little irrational number gate open, square root of 2 and all of that, the moment you let them in the door, it goes from a countable infinity, which is just the whole numbers and rational numbers and fractions and all that, to an uncountable infinity. And whether or not, and here's another one, are there a finite number of infinities, or are there an infinite number of infinities? And if there are an infinite number, are they a countable number of infinities or an uncountable number? And if at that point your brain isn't steaming up, there's something wrong with you.
I'm contemplating the window right now.
Exactly. And that now you know how the engineers would feel when they would talk to me. But it's really ultimately an interesting subject, because it does relate to how you deal with absolutes and things that are outside of your personal experience. We're terrible at probability thinking. We're terrible at thinking about subatomic particles. It's weird, and it's not going to not be weird because it's weird. And we have trouble thinking about relativity theory. And what do you mean time can speed up and slow down? What do you mean mass goes up and down depending on how fast you are? What do you mean I shrink when I speed up through time?
I definitely believe you when you say that humans have a terrible ability to comprehend probabilities. You know, just look at all the creationist arguments based on probability.
Yeah, and we know, because various people who study statistics and human nature and all the rest look into it, that they can pose questions in such ways that they can reveal just how our seat of the pants intuitions can lead us astray. And that's why so many sciences only started getting rigorous, and that's true for genetics, and it's true for a whole bunch of things, when they could quantify it with a testable mathematical formula and do it that way. Because the moment it becomes a mathematical formula, the mathematicians can have fun with it, because then you can realize this formula, if you can do that, and under these conditions, it becomes like this, and that's a transformation series, and if you relate that to that, and that's how so many of advanced science proceeds, to where they can do that in ways that we use that with information compression for videos, and coding systems that you can make unbreakable codes using quantum theory and all of these other kinds of weird shit that is really quite amazing. So all of this abstract mathematics crap, it's no coincidence that people like Pythagoras and the bunch back in the ancient days were like the cutting edge weirdos of sciences because they dealt with all of that mathematics stuff and they were asking, why is this? And is it because gods make it? Is it true whether we like it or not? Are there any laws of mathematics that are objectively true, or is all mathematics simply contrived? And mathematicians still have this debate today because it's an unsettlable, decidable proposition, but may or may not be true. So all of that stuff relates. It's a way to come into the back door of philosophy to show that it's not unique to philosophy. These issues of dealing with presuppositions and analytical techniques and logical Aristotelian logic stuff aren't unique to that at all. They show up in its purest distilled son of a bitch detail mode in mathematics. Well, there that lost most of our audience probably. So here we are. We're 15 minutes past the hour. We got in at least a good time to talk with you. I'm glad you were able to come in on stuff and to know that everybody's well.
Yeah.
If you're in Texas, pay no attention to the idiot who's governor. Wear a mask and keep social distancing and avoid stuff. Otherwise, you're going to have shit to pay from resurgences in areas. This is not a time to dilly-dally. Or you can just suppress the data field the way the governor of Florida does, or make sure rich people get their vaccinations first. You got to make sure Palm Beach is served. Yeah, there we go. Yep. That's the Republican way. Sorry about the politics, but that's the way I am. Anyway, see you all next week. We'll shut the. Oh, let me put our rocks over there. We need to put our commercial up for our book. Good gravy, Marie. Yeah, there we go. Let's put that up. Let's get that. We got a wonderful advertisement that our dear pal Peter came up with. We got to show that. There we go. Let's get that. We'll share that on screen. There we go. And there we'll get that running. And we can talk over it because none of the sound comes through. There we go. So, oops. Need to activate that. There we go. So now you're seeing part of the thing. And we'll have to figure out whether we want to use a matching or a comparable cover for Rockstick to do that. I think we probably should have a slightly different piece of real estate for the second volume so that it will stand out from the first volume.
I agree.
And but we can virtually guarantee that it will be roughly the same size as the first volume, and we'll have roughly the same amount of documentation level, which is a shitload. So, and click, available at an Amazon.com near you. So away we go on that. There's our commercial. There's our book. We're very proud of it. It was a hoot to write. I think it's one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've had in working on things because it's such a fascinating give and take. And I learned a shitload in the process of doing the work, and I would hope to think that you had some stuff that you didn't know about prior to writing the book as well.
I absolutely did, yeah.
And so it was a matter of where writing the book, and that's the advantage of when you do that. If you're rigorous, writing a book like that, you end up smarter than you were before you wrote it. You know stuff that you didn't know before. You have a clarity of thought, unless you're standing for truth or raw mat, in which case the slide runs the opposite direction and you know less after writing the book than you did before.
You know less after writing it. Yeah, that's pretty apt.
Yeah, and so we do not want to go down that nether road. That is not the path we are on. So everybody stay safe again, and see you all next week. We're hanging in there and busy beavers all the time. Bye.
Bye.